Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Ross, for that introduction. I wish I had as good of an opening question as Steven did, but I don't think there's been enough pop culture references to voice search to ask you who your favorite is. So if you guys just want to go ahead and give us some traditional introductions, we'll get started.
Yeah, I'm Candace Bixler. I'm the Director of Digital Marketing at Avoya Travel. A little bit about my company. We're an online travel agency that specializes in cruises, tours, and all-inclusive resorts. What makes us a little bit different is we connect travelers with independent vacation planners. So it's that hybrid experience of the ease of online search, but then introducing the element of human touch with the personalized service and expertise that travel experts provide. So with that said, we're not your traditional e-commerce website. We're lead gen based. So in my role, overseeing inbound traffic strategies for conversion tactics such as search, as well as brand marketing tactics as well.
Great.
That was awesome. Hi, I'm Melanie Mitchell. I am Director of Acquisition and SEO at Chewy. We are an e-commerce pet company. We're actually one of the largest e-commerce pet companies in the world, and we were recently acquired by the investment company that also owns PetSmart. And in addition to doing e-commerce, we also create content to help pet users throughout their journey. So whether you get a new pet or it's in a different life stage or there's medical conditions, we're trying to help people find the answers as well as connect them to the right products for their pet, because it is a $60 billion industry, and there's a reason why. Is because people treat their pets like children, so we're happy to play in that space. And quite frankly, it's a lot of fun because I have two cats, Daisy and Henry. And so it's fun that I get to do what I love, which is content marketing and SEO, but also think about pets and pet owners all day.
Chewy has saved my dog from not having dinner one night. So, personal advocate. Alex Chaikin, Delta Airlines, in marketing communications. Great,
thank you. This morning we've heard a lot about how voice search is growing. But I think it was 20% this year and expected to be nearly 50% by 2020. How is this trend changing the way that you're marketing to your customers?
Yes, so for us, it's really how do we evolve our content marketing strategy? Organic is currently the way to get in front of these voice search users. But really for us, it's how do we tailor the content that we're sending to these users? These voice queries are really creating new levels of intent. And how do we really make sure that it's recommendations that are really fitting that specific voice search and really getting them that answer quickly?
So what's interesting, and I think about it like, mobile. A lot of people were surprised by mobile. It was like the year of mobile for the longest time, and then it was. And a lot of people are playing catch up even today, which is kind of insane to me. I don't want to be caught off guard with voice search. And I gotta say, I'm not thinking about it 100% right now, because when I look at the data, when I look for things like OK Google or something around Cortana, it's less than 1% of what I'm seeing, but I'm starting to see changes in queries overall. So a lot of the who, what, when, where, why, hows. So what's the best collar for my dog, or how do I measure my dog for a collar, or something like that. And so I think about it in terms of the SEO. To your point, Candace. So a lot of the structured data and the markup and trying to capture the featured snippets, to be honest, because I feel like that strategy is going to lend very nicely into how voice search is being structured and the questions that people are answering. So hopefully, as we're seeing that data shift more, it'll probably change a little bit, but that's really how I think about it today.
For us at Delta, it's really taking a look at all of our roadmaps for 2018 and seeing, how and where can we integrate voice. And so it's across the board. It's saying what role does it play as yet just another touch point or another customer interaction that we need to be looking at.
And Candace, you'd mentioned content. How big of a shift, how big of an investment is it to sort of change the way things are set up now to accommodate the ways in which people will search via voice versus, organically through typing?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's not replacing the current marketing strategies in place. It's really a supplement. So it's really when we speak about road mapping and really what that customer path looks like, where are they dropping off? Are they bouncing? When they're completing a voice versus a text query, are they completing the actions that we really have set in place for them? So for us, it's really going after the low-hanging fruit of how are people using voice search today versus kind of really when we think in 2020 when it does become a much larger player in the field of how will it continue to evolve. So in the shorter term for us, it's how do we complement the way users are using voice search today, in the travel landscape?
Yeah, I would say the same. I mean, we're thinking about, I mean, e-commerce, this isn't just Chewy specific, but I think e-commerce in general struggles in some ways because it's such thin content. You know, you don't want to clutter the page too much because you're really trying to sell the product. So we're trying to think about what's good for the consumer, and some of it lends quite nicely into the voice search piece. So not just a description of the product, but a lot of questions people have, and this is where we tap into customer service, because that's one of our big key differentiators is, you know, we pride ourselves in answering the phone as a human in less than 6 seconds. We answer a lot of people who are doing maybe chat with us in less than 15 seconds. And so there's a lot of questions coming through, and we want to understand what are people looking for, what do we need. So we started adding things like nutritional info, or, you know, key benefits, or, you know, something along those lines, like how to measure certain pets for certain things. Because let's say like an 80-pound dog is not always the same. There's some that are kind of short and fat, and there's some that are long and lean. A lot of people are returning these harnesses in some cases, or leashes or collars, because they don't know how to do it properly. And so we're using that to lend into the content strategy, which then ties back to even some of the data we're seeing today, which I believe is truly voice beyond what we can see in OK Google and Cortana stuff.
As I mentioned earlier, putting the customer at the heart of our strategy, to your point, Melanie, is all about really letting the data drive the decision. So what do people want to know? And letting that information kind of bubble up is the most important. Not really changing our strategy yet today, but again, in the future, I think the intent is way more clear with voice. People have gotten really used to shorthand, you know, shorter tail queries on search, and it's hard to always know, what do you really want to know? And so with voice, speaking into a device, people are being trained and feel like they need to provide, you know, longer queries, full sentences. And so once you're able to capture that, you can respond in a much more personalized and relevant way.
And you mentioned that before during your chat with Lori about how personalization was such an important initiative for you at Delta. I want to ask you, and of course the other panelists, if that's also an initiative that you have going on. What role voice search is going to have in how you develop that personalized touch with your customers?
I can answer, because it's something I'm really starting to think about, not just, again, for voice search, because I think, you know, to what we've talked about before, voice search is part of the overall strategy for marketing. It's not just looking at it in isolation, and I think a lot of this blends together. Some of the things I'm thinking about for our content in general is, I know people search for information around the size of their pet, so whether they have a big bird or a small dog or a fat cat or something. We don't really talk to people that way with our content now. And so I'm trying to figure out, like, how can we start to shift that conversation in a way so when people start to search or use voice more, that we are able to answer those questions. One of the things we've been doing with customer service is we have a tool now. So if you call in and you give information about your pet, whether it has maybe a medical problem, or maybe it's on a certain prescription or something, or even its name or its birthday, and so we can send you flowers on the pet's birthday or something, we're capturing that. But what we're moving towards going into 2018 is not only be able to get that information, but get self-directed information from you about your pet. So is it let's say a dog, is it a working dog, like a hunting dog, or is it a pet? Is it a certain breed? Is it a certain size, a certain age? So then we can really start to target not just for voice and the content itself, but even email. How do we talk to you with video, et cetera? And so I think it's really exciting that we are getting more targeted that way, because I personally, I order food for my family because I get a 20% discount. So my family has dogs. I have cats. I get emails, sorry, Chewy. I get emails about, like, hey, buy some dog food. I'm like, I don't have a dog. And I want them to understand me, but I want you guys to understand me. If I'm going on a vacation, or if I'm looking for a taxi, I want you to know who I am and talk to me in a way that is meaningful to me, not just, I'm just a person that's, you want to take my money.
We deal with that a lot. The word personalization is kind of overused and almost thrown out the window at this point, right? I mean, I don't know what word replaces it. The word that comes to mind is individualized, because it's layer deeper than personalized. Personalized today in Delta's emails, we're recognizing you by name. We know your flight information. We know your SkyMiles number, your medallion status. That's simply not good enough. It's knowing, Melanie, that you don't have a dog, but that you order it for someone else. And so it's really picking up on other cues, again, to get that depth, to build out a comprehensive profile of, I fly for business, and here are my patterns and my trends. But when I'm flying for leisure and I have my family with me, here's more of my behaviors. And so really being able to, again, look at that holistic picture, it's complex, right? Like, you're talking about the same person that acts differently in different situations throughout their journey. And that's across, again, all brands, all platforms, that really needs to be uncovered. And that's why I was focused on getting the data right, piping it in, using what the customer can tell you about themselves, the information that they're willing to share, and pulling that in, plus the information you already have to kind of build out this bigger vision.
And with virtual assistants, really, let's talk about the role that they play in helping to flesh out that individualized approach that you just mentioned. You know, every one of us that has one in our home, we're logged in, we're locked in, and even if we're not asking for something that specifically, you know, a company may be selling, there's certain insights that they can gather about us as an audience subset. Can you guys speak to how you expect virtual assistants to impact advertising from, do you think it'll be more impactful from an audience standpoint or from a straight transactional standpoint?
I can start here. I absolutely see it from an audience standpoint. It's just beautiful third-party data for in-market audiences that we all love. So when we speak of digital homes and really the data that those virtual assistants are capturing, it's so much more in a home environment. That's really your place of where you live and what you do on your day-to-day activities. It really is introducing a new layer of data. As marketers, we're all going to be really excited about. So for me, it's how do we get in front of those users earlier versus being too focused on the transaction piece. So how do we keep our brands top of mind?
So it's interesting. We had a conversation the other day, and I honestly thought exactly the opposite. I really thought about it as a transactional item when I thought about voice search, because I think about how I use, you know, my ISO, and I think about how the questions that I ask, it's really I want something now, and I just want it quick, and whether it's an answer, whether it's something, or whatever. And so when I think about what I try to do with the pet space, it could be maybe someone's reordering the same, you know, horse treats or something else, and like I just want to give it to them really quick. But then I started to think more about the emotional component of maybe some of the questions that people are asking, because it could be something in the moment, you know, again, going back to my world, if maybe it's a medical issue that they're trying to solve, or it's a life stage that the pet's in, or they're trying to find an answer to something that's very personal, because people do treat their pets like their kids. And it's interesting because I've seen it more connecting with people on Instagram and just listening in on our customer service calls. That's really important to them. And then I started to think about things like Amazon's Spot, which I'm kind of interested in, because it takes that marrying of the voice search, but you have the element of the visual piece. And so how do you tell that story and build that relationship beyond just like, again, really quick trying to solve that problem? And I don't quite have an answer yet, but because of the conversation we all had just the other day, I'm like, I really need to think about that more, because I don't want to start treating people just like, you know, a transaction. I really wanted to have that relationship so that they not only care about what they're trying to solve, but they care about the brand.
I mean, there's a humanized element to these voice and assistants, right? Like, no matter what your preference is of product, it's someone that you're interacting with. So even hearing someone's voice, there is already an emotional connection that you have to this device. What I think is interesting is we talk a lot about them in the home, and Amazon announcing Alexa for Business earlier this week. It's really talking about how is it pervasive throughout your life? What role does this play in all the different places, whether you're in your car, whether you are at home, whether you're in your workplace? Really, how does it, again, big picture, kind of zoom out and say, what role does this play across everything I do? And so I think there's something interesting there, specifically for, you know, advertisers, to say you're interacting with them in all different times and days and situations.
Absolutely. And One thing that you had said, Melanie, at the beginning with regard to mobile is, people playing catch up. Obviously, early adoption is key. I think Alex from Uber had mentioned that they always just want to be out at the beginning of anything that's out there so that they're constantly in front of everybody. What are the early steps that advertisers can take to make sure that they are adopting early when it comes to voice search?
I think it's three things. I think one, you have to be mobile ready. And if you're not, you need to get on it. I think two, it's secure site, because that's going to play a key component in the rankings. We're already seeing it across desktop and mobile having an impact. And three, it's structured data. And I think that's going to be an important part, because it's not just a nice to have and, hey, this is something interesting. You really have to get on it to help the engines understand what it is that page is about, and especially they're getting into specifics. So I can add structured data around, again, pet type, pet size, pet breed, age, all these different life stages that are beyond just like, hey, here's the product, here's the price, it's available or not. And I would say even the last thing, the team. You have to have the team in place. I think SEO is a key component to this, not just from a content part, but also a technical SEO piece, understanding that structured data, having the right engineers that understand how to build that content and what's happening in the code, and making sure they're not adding a whole bunch of stuff to decrease speed time or weigh it down. And then also your content folks. Like I'm starting to spend a lot more time with our creative folks and content folks. God love them, but sometimes we have to have that compromise of what's good for the consumer, but also what's good for people discovering. And I try to tell them, like, you're building a billboard in a woods and no one's going to be able to find this, so let's work together so that if people are asking a question, we have a chance of winning that spot, because not only is it specific to that question, but it also isn't weighed down and very, creative and visual, et cetera.
Yeah, there's definitely been a need for increased collaboration internally throughout departments that wouldn't necessarily interact. So as Melanie mentioned, creating folks with obviously also coders, so that we kind of all are on the same page going down the path together. Delta's strategy is not always to be first to market. Sometimes we like to be second intentionally. And so that's really, it's really seeing what's out there, getting a full lay of the land and focused on the data, the structured data, as well as, again, that full customized profile, so that when you are ready to ask the questions, we are there and able to respond no matter what the intent is.
And you had mentioned, and I think it happened, it was brought up a little bit earlier too, about chatbots, and that Delta, you mentioned that in your fireside chat that you're working on that, and I think there were a couple other hands here. Chatbots and any other, sort of technological investments that can be made by brands and advertisers, what direction should they take when it comes to capturing voice search and really embracing it?
That's one of the pieces as we put together kind of our chatbot roadmap that voice is on. So it's really looking at that interplay, how does it complement what someone's doing? So if they want to switch back and forth, if they feel like they're not getting what they want from voice and they want to switch to typing, or they're not able to type given their now current situation and they want to switch to voice, it's that interplay of how those two things work really well together that we need to ensure we are, again, putting on our roadmaps to think about as we're doing something. It's never in a silo. It's really looking at how does voice play a role in this.
I keep doing that. It's interesting because a big part of our business model is the element of human touch. But with that said, I really see chatbots as a way of better qualifying that lead, right? And really distributing them out to that right independent vacation planner. So for us with chatbot extensions and different things out there, it's really how can we better answer those questions up front before they are really routed to our customer service team. For me, it's really all about driving efficiencies.
So we talked a little bit about the role of virtual assistants with building our audiences and with that, and if that is a little bit more impactful than the transactional side, we are a very very visually driven society. Everything is on screens, and a lot of industries are frankly they're fueled by that. Whether it's clothing, things you need to look at and see before you purchase cars. What are the different roles you expect, sort of voice and virtual assistants to play for industries that are more visually driven?
Again, so for us, imagery is such a huge component of inspiration when it comes to travel. So when it comes to a virtual assistant, where that isn't part of that, it's then how does that really, I think it's again another cross-device attribution and really getting in front of the audiences, kind of how do you follow up with that messaging? And for imagery and content, it's just such an important component, especially as I mentioned, for me, the way users are really currently using voice search, I do really see it being in the travel space, especially with cruises, tours, things with longer booking windows, being a more inspirational of when is the best time to visit Europe, or where should I go in Europe for the best fall foliage? And you know, they might give you a voice query, but then how is that followed up on other devices further down the customer journey?
Couldn't agree more, just with travel being such an inspirational and a big purchase, right, for a lot of folks, that they look forward to their one trip a year that they can't wait to take, and it's a big decision. Less so among this crowd, who I saw someone earlier tweet about their 40-plus flights already this year on Delta. So, you know, it really is. It's making sure that connected customer experience exists across all channels. So instead of a message, again, that has a static audience, when someone's on, you know, social later, scrolling through their Facebook feed, what are you showing based on what they searched earlier? What are their friends doing? Going back again to the data that's there, if I say I booked a trip and I'm going with a bunch of girlfriends, you know, voice assistant, send my itinerary to my 3 best girlfriends, X, Y, and Z. They need that information there to already shoot that out and make it seamless for me. So in order to truly act as an assistant, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But I think, again, that cross-channel connected experience is going to be key as to how you don't lose that visual element. And I also personally think, again, it's complementary, where I want to be able to say, people care about what plane they're on, what their aircraft looks like, what their seat looks like, especially if they're going to upgrade and purchase into a cabin that they haven't necessarily experienced before. We have full 360 views where you can get inside a cabin and see exactly what it's going to look like, what's there, what are the amenities, what do I need to bring. And so it may be that interplay back and forth where, you know, you're ready to book a flight, but it's show me that seat. And then it switches and pulls up on your screen, whatever screen you're using, to really show you what it looks like. And then you can either hit purchase right there, or you can switch back to voice to be able to say, complete my booking.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, because that's how I'm thinking about it too. And I think about, like, when I look at the data, and Chewy, again, is not atypical for e-commerce. Searches coming through right now on mobile, but the transactions are happening on desktop. And sometimes it's looking at the visual, or maybe they're on the go, or they're not ready to buy at that point in time. And so what is the role of voice? Because, you know, Amazon Spot, again, to me is kind of interesting, because it does blend that voice and the visual. There could be that point in time that you could be able to have it understand, based on maybe some sort of authenticated login, that, hey, I'm doing a voice search here, but I also have my screen, so show it to me here. And then I think there's going to be more Amazon Spot-like devices that'll come into the play that will have voice and visual components to it. But it's understanding, what are people using you for? Because in my world, it could just be something really quick, like, hey, my dog has a red spot on its side, what could this be? And trying to find an answer, versus trying to see something visual, maybe in the travel space, or even like the retail clothing space. It just might be, I need an instant answer. And so there's more to determine, like, what that content strategy is. And back to the point of, like, I don't think anyone's investing all in on a full-on voice strategy at this point, because there's still so much to be learned, and that's where you can do a lot of backpedaling and a lot of groveling if you start to just push it out there without really understanding the data.
And right now, the way that, you know, with all of us using mobile and desktop predominantly, we have choices as to where we want to do our research and where we want to do our shopping. But whether people know it or not, as they, you know, as they utilize virtual assistants more and more over time, we're essentially committing to a specific avenue by which we're going to get the information. If it's Google Home, it's going to be powered by Google, Cortana by Bing, Echo by Bing and by Amazon. How is that adoption going to really change the way that you disperse, you know, sort of your marketing dollars and in your investments in the future?
It's going to depend on the audience. It's going to depend on the data. I mean, right now we can, and I think people have talked about this before, you can see in the analytics as far as, again, the qualifiers of, you know, Google, Cortana, whatever, but you can start to see a change in the searches. I think if Google, Marin, Kenshu, and others are smart, they're going to start to be able to categorize the queries that are coming through. So, you know, now we can separate like what's desktop, mobile, and you can get into shopping, you can get into, you know, feeds, you can get into other details, and even when you get in display, you can start to understand the different areas people are coming from, and whether it's branding versus acquisition. If they're smart, they're going to start to be able to say this is coming from not just voice search, but this is coming from a Google device or Amazon, or it's coming from Cortana or some like your mobile device or your desktop, so that we can then start to make decisions. And that's how, you know, quite frankly, those if we can justify to, you know, not just our bosses, but our bosses' bosses, like this is what works. And truly, I believe voice is going to be that big thing, because we're seeing, even from 2016, 20% of the searches, which is astounding to me, are coming from voice search, and they're predicting 50%, which I think it's going to be sooner than that, just based on the adoption of these devices by 2020. If you can help us justify that to our bosses, everybody wins, because it helps us get in front of these trends and quite frankly, doing what we want to do to you know, whatever, you know, for me it's selling product, but whatever it is that you're trying to do for your company. Yeah.
Do you hear that, Google, Kenshu, Marin? We need you.
Yeah.
And that actually brings up a great point, because with mobile, and there's a lot of parallels to the way voice search is starting to the way we, you know, talked about mobile a number of years ago. You know, it was constantly the year of mobile, I think for like 4 straight years, and it took not only consumer adoption, but also, you know, some ways for advertisers to leverage those devices differently for things to really become efficient for advertisers and allow them to make that investment. Do you think that that's going to be something that's going to be required for voice search to take off in a similar way? Will AdWords and Bing and other platforms need to provide advertisers with different ways to leverage voice search, or do you think it'll just get folded in with every other type of typed out search?
I think it's already in the works.
Yeah, I was thinking it's yes-ish, because going back to featured snippets and some of the structured data and the questions that people are answering and how we're seeing changes in queries, not just through voice, but through desktop, through mobile. It's already happening. I think it'll be a natural transition in some ways into voice, and then that'll just accelerate it as people adopt it. And it's funny, because I was sitting on the plane going from Fort Lauderdale to Atlanta, and this woman next to me was using voice, and she was about the same age as me. So it's not just like, you know, I see my nieces and nephews are using it a lot. I see my dad's using it a lot, but then this woman here is like conducting just normal business using voice search, and what first I was kind of annoyed, because I'm like, oh, I'm on a plane, I'm just trying to get. And I was like, oh man, that's kind of cool. Like, I can't believe this is happening. And you're seeing that, and that's going to really push us marketers to figure out like how much time we want to invest specifically for voice.
That's a really interesting point just about the disruption, because Delta recently launched free text messaging on all of our flights. And so to think about, you know, it's a pretty silent experience when you're on a plane, you're kind of in the zone. Most people put in headphones, but if you're not and you're sitting there, very curious to see how many people are using voice to kind of dictate their text messages, and what disruption that causes to kind of the current state of people's travel journey.
Yeah, the natural transition, that's really interesting to me. The beauty of voice search is the usability component, right? For cruising, our demographic, we have a lot of retired couples, a lot of multi-generational travel, so I'm still surprised at the rate of mobile adoption. You know, when I look at our site analytics and really how that shifts versus voice search, when I look at those analytics, it's crazy to see how it's already being adopted. So I think the quicker that we're able to really deliver those custom results recommendations, the faster, and like to your point, before 2020, that adoption really will be at a rapid pace.
Thank you all so much. Ross, I think, is going to take it from here.
Yeah, we'll take questions from the floor if anyone has it. I see one right over here. Reminder to just tell us who you are and where you work, please. Here you go.
So Matt Fisher from Microsoft. How are you guys using sentiment in how you're looking at data? Voice is a really good opportunity to pick up sentiment, where I need my dog food versus I need to order my dog food. Similar tokens, but very different way it's spoken. So I don't know how each of you can go about that, but are you looking at that? And if not, do you think that will help?
Yeah, we are looking at it for sure, and I think that's where, You know, we had some debate. We have a blog called Pet Central that does answer a lot of questions, and they were so funny because they just wrote an article about, and I got the letter or an email on Monday like, woohoo, because they wrote an article about pet behavior for the holidays and what you can do, and it's tied back to certain training behaviors for the product itself. So we tried to do a hybrid of not just, you know, the content, but also here's some solutions, whether your dog might have itchy ears, like here's the things you can look for, but here's some, you know, remedies that you can come across. And we're trying to play in that space rather than clutter the e-commerce site with all of that sentiment information, trying to solve for all the things, because then I feel like that kind of loses what our core business is, which is to, you know, help sell dog food or hard goods or what have you. And so we're trying to figure out what's that content strategy, both from that side and then thinking about even like PetMD, which is also a partner of ours with PetSmart. You know, a lot of people go to there to answer some of the questions. How do we leverage some of that to help them along that path? And I don't quite have an answer yet, but we're seeing it pay off because not only did we see a lot of traffic coming from these seasonal articles and transactional articles, but they're actually driving revenue. So we see articles that'll drive like $20,000 in revenue. And while it might be one article, there's thousands of these articles. And so it's interesting to see how this will go on, especially tied back to voice.
A core KPI in the airline industry is for sure social sentiment, so something that we have to pay attention to. Again, just being in the know of what's going on with our passengers, what kind of state of mind are our customers in, especially going back to that treatment and how do we respond. So I think absolutely, again, as we look at roadmaps, voice is going to be one of those things that sentiment is going to play a huge role in, especially as we're looking to maintain that emotional connection and that humanizing element.
Take one more question, if there is one. If there is not, thank you, David. Thank you, panel. That was great.